He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're exploring a few more bipedal hairy hominid encounters. But before that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, X, YouTube, Facebook. And if you wish to reach us directly, you can send us an email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. Now, if you missed last week's episode, I highly recommend scrolling back an inch on our feeds just because Reuben makes his big return and he sort of interviews me, which the episode primarily focuses on our discussion of our thoughts on just a few of the more prominent cryptids, how after such a long time those thoughts may have changed. But he caught me off guard because he kindly took it upon himself just to throw some questions my way, which I was not expecting, but it's still a dang good time. I felt like I was an honorary member, a guest on a show being interviewed with him. It's just funny. But without further ado, we're going to get into our main focus of today's show. So over the past month, I have been heavily focusing on the Sasquatch encounters aspect, specifically mostly due to my intrigue just being immensely sparked on Bigfoot right now. Now, it's kind of funny with cryptids and the unknown because it hits me in waves. There was a little bit ago I was really into aliens, UAPs, UFOs, and so the show kind of steers a little bit more into that area at that time. But the warmer summer months here, it just gives me the Bigfoot vibes, the hiking, the fishing, the camping. Overall, just being outdoors more just gives me that pull to it. So after these reports I detail below, I'm thinking of doing a research episode next with Reuben, but I'll elaborate more on that at the end of this episode. So without further ado, and I quote, 2002, about 2 miles south of Madison County. After traveling for about 2 hours, a gentleman and his friend were returning from Missouri, where they were attending a live music show. They began to enter a section of road that had a higher than average amount of curves and turns, and so as the driver reduced his speed, he was curving to the left towards a short section of a straight road that was then leading into a right curve. It was this curve that a dark-colored human-like figure was standing dead center on the highway. Just inside the start of the turn, the vehicle and its occupants were approximately 50 yards from this figure. Immediately, the driver started to brake, and while doing so, the creature turned quickly and faced the vehicle. In what was assumed to be a sort of surprise, the driver detailed that it stood in an awkward position with its upper body being ramrod straight and its shoulders thrown back, but its knees bent. Now, from the waist up, the body was being held as if a soldier was standing at attention. It didn't move until they were within 30 yards from it, where the headlights were fully lighting up the creature. It finally turned and ran at an angle towards the southwest, inside of the curve of the road. Now, the driver asked his passenger if she saw it, but she replied with, "See what?" After leaning forward to observe, she did later claim to have maybe seen a figure move briefly, but it was not for the length of time as the driver had saw it. The driver did try to speed up the vehicle and see if the animal was still within view, and he eventually found that there was a very steep and high road cut bank on that side of the road, and the face of the cut was covered by loose shale and sandstone. Now, he quickly saw that the steep bank extended for at least 30 yards beyond the spot where the animal ran off. And looking down to where the road cut ended and where the accessible natural slope of the ridge started, the animal did leave with exceptional speed, but the driver was still certain he would have seen the animal before it could get out of sight in the curve, yet he saw nothing. No evidence either of where it might have scaled the road cut, again emphasizing that no creature could have been fast enough to scale the cut bank or reach the unaltered slope of the ridge in the very few seconds that had elapsed between the time that the animal ran away and the time before the vehicle accelerated to catch up after seeing it. Now, the creature itself was reported to be 8 to 9 feet in height, covered in long hair that appeared to be dark colored, but not specifically black. There was no visible light reflecting from the creature's eyes, and its body was wide and bulky with no noticeable tapering from the chest to its midsection. He could not discern the animal's facial features except for its head, which was that of a human, only larger. While the body was large, its arms, legs, and shoulders were not very muscular, and there was no discernible sexual body parts that were identifiable to see if this was male or female either. End quote. Now, if we head south a bit more from where this took place, specifically northwest Arkansas, many more sightings have been documented there regarding large bipedal primates. And the downside to this encounter, though, was that the driver didn't receive that concrete affirmation from his passenger. It definitely doesn't sound like he needed it, though. Coming out of an experience like that and trying to tell others about it, having multiple but yet still aligning perspectives can be very potent when sharing these details of a sighting. So it is unfortunate, but as like I said, he's very, very confident in what he saw. He was able to discern a lot of these features from its height and its body. It's just very, very incredible. But at the end of the day, this thing managed to just evade him and disappear. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole on how these things can just escape from sight so quickly. They are fast, but they are big. And this thing is at night, so it does have the ability of hiding if it knows the area. But I do think it's quite interesting that this thing was just caught off guard standing in the middle of the road. Not the first time either. There have been creatures in ditches where people whip around a corner and this thing's dead center of their headlights. And it's like, whoa, this thing was not expecting to be spotted here on both parties, from the person driving the vehicle and the creature in the ditch. Usually it's late at night, and usually it's just some middle back road, highway road that doesn't see a lot of traffic at this time. And if these creatures are familiar with the area, and they're probably familiar with how much travel is usually happening, they probably pick these moments. I'm not saying that they're time conscious, but I think that they are aware of their place in the specific area. I want to refrain from saying the word time because they don't have the 24-hour, 12-hour clock like we are familiar with. But I think that they are present enough and conscious enough to know, hey, this part of the day has a lot less human activity surrounding it. So that's when they probably make their move or go out and about a little bit more. Go out near roads, which is still very dangerous for them, but I digress. Now, this next encounter takes place back in 1993. And it reminds me a lot of a similar experience regarding a guest we had on the show, Derek Young. Great guy in a very detailed episode of Encounter. I highly recommend it. If you haven't listened to it yet, it's on our feeds. Go check it out. Again, great guy. And I quote, "When I was a teenager, before everybody had cell phones and whatnot, I used to live at a place about 13 miles outside of Mississippi. There's nothing there but hunting and fishing, with lots of creeks, rivers, ponds, small lakes, woods, logging roads that would just go on for miles. So some relatives of mine owned a great deal of land close to where I lived, and on their land was an old logging road that went to a creek called Tallahatta. It's a long and winding creek. This creek in some places is as wide as most rivers, but it's always shallow until it rains. So my relative's property was close by to this creek. They had actually built a cabin on this bit of property, just a simple one-room cabin for camping, but it was constructed up high on 5-foot telephone poles, and this was for when the creek would flood, the cabin could still be above the water. I camped there many times, but one fall night when I went camping there, and the last time I went camping there, I went with some friends. There were 4 of us in total. We'd been fishing all day and planned to stay there for the night, so we fished till dark, and we went back to the cabin where we made a little fire, hung out, drank some whiskey we borrowed, and cleaned lots of fish. We did that until about 11 p.m., and then all went to the cabin for the night and lit up a few Coleman lanterns and got a good fire going in the wood heater as we laid down for the night. Now, the next thing I knew, I woke up to some noise in the cabin, and I looked around while rubbing my eyes to see one of my friends almost jogging through the cabin from the door to his bed. And I guess I was the last to wake up. I asked what everyone was doing, and in one group response, they replied that something was outside. I rolled my eyes and turned away to lie back down while saying, "There's nothing out there, go back to sleep." Just as I finished saying it, I heard it. It sounded like limbs breaking a short distance away. Now, one of my friends yelled out, "What the hell is that?" To which another replied with, "I don't know." I was definitely awake now, so I got up and tried to listen better, and I could hear it. When I put my ear to the wall, I could hear what sounded like something hitting trees and walking heavily through the woods next to our cabin. I started to think of what it could be. I knew it wasn't a buck. The season wasn't until later in the year, and of course, there are black bears around, but I never heard any commotion like this. Plus, it sounded like it was growling. Now, my friends and I grew up hunting and fishing in the woods, and we're fairly adept when it comes to animal sightings and sounds, but this type of sound and behavior I was really not familiar with. The more I listened, the more I could hear it pacing back and forth in the adjacent woods, and at one point, it made a loud noise like a growl and then broke some tree limbs. As I stepped back from the wall, I said, "What are we going to do?" One of my friends replied, "What do you mean?" And I stated that, what if whatever is out there tries to get in here? Now, we did have a .38 snub-nosed pistol with only 5 shells. It's something I always make sure to bring along when I go camping. So we all started to just get our boots and our jackets on, get dressed. While we were doing this, we could still hear the sounds outside. But once we kind of spread out inside the cabin, suddenly it stopped. My one friend thought maybe whatever it was had finally left. But I thought maybe it was closer to us now, no longer in the woods. My other friend went to the door that had a small diamond-shaped window. It basically allowed you to view the steps outside. I yelled at him not to open the door, but he assured everyone he was only looking, and after a while he said he didn't see anything and asked us if we wanted to make a run for the four-wheelers. They were about 30 yards from the trail to the logging road. It was a very long walk, especially if whatever was out there was still out there. And after listening a little longer, but hearing nothing, we thought it best to maybe wait until sunrise so we could see better outside. About 15 minutes had passed before we heard it. A sudden and large thud on the back side of the cabin, about halfway up the wall. Now, we all grouped in the middle of the cabin together out of panic, but we are all yelling at whatever it was, "Just go away." I was shouting out that I had a gun, and if you don't go, well, we'll shoot. Still, no response, though. So I ran to the wall, pressed my head against it to see if I could hear anything. This sound still freaks me out today, and it sounded like heavy breathing about the waist down from me and almost like a hand rubbing against the outside wall like it was trying to find a way in. I stepped back and looked at the wall. It was head level where I heard what sounded like a hand rubbing the wall, and if you were standing outside, that would be almost 12 feet from the ground. And my friends asked if I heard anything, and even though I said no, they knew I did. We decided to go. We walked to the door and got ready. After the door opened, we ran together. Now, I fired a couple shots up into the air, just to scare whatever could possibly be there. We reached our four-wheelers, and we were gone. I felt like something was going to snatch me off the back, so I kept turning around so I could see behind us, but I didn't see anything. It felt like forever, though, until we got back to my house. It was almost 3 a.m. by the time we made it home. After banging on the door, my dad finally woke up and was pretty angry because he thought we were camping for the night. Also, that we left all his stuff back at the cabin. I didn't want to tell him what had happened, so at first light, my friends and I headed back to collect our things. Feeling more confident in the daylight, when we got back, everything seemed to be in order. As my friends went inside, I went around to the back and looked up at the wall where I heard the breathing. It was about 8 feet up. And where I heard the hand rubbing, the wall was 12 feet. I looked all over the ground and could see no tracks of any kind, but the ground was pretty hard. And we searched the woods around the cabin and did find limbs broken and pulled down from a variety of different heights, the highest being, I'd say, 9 feet up and the lowest around 4 feet, though no hairs, smells, anything. I did go camping again the following year, but not there. I did go to the cabin a few times, though, for fishing, but always during the day. I'm not scared of those woods, but I do fear what might be in them. End quote. Terrifying encounter. And again, it really reminds me a lot of that Derek Young encounter. Just the fact that you are in a cabin, something is well within the uncomfortable zone of your cabin, and it's so bad that in the middle of the night, you have to leave. Now, we can assume or claim this is Bigfoot, but ultimately, they didn't see anything to lead us down that road. Running off in the night is dangerous when you know a wild animal is around, but the positive, at least, is firing the gun would absolutely make a predator apprehensive, at least for the slightest of minutes that would give you an edge to make an escape. Based on previous encounters, we know these creatures do smack walls for whatever reason that remains unknown. But if you're in a situation and your intuition tells you it's not good or you feel threatened, chances are it's accurate. That trust your gut instinct. Now, of course, instincts can be wrong. And it is heavily based on previous experiences where that experience is almost pattern-based, if that makes sense. And in this scenario, I think it's primarily just the unknown, something you know isn't familiar and stranger danger, or it's trying to get inside your home, something that's uninvited. And these things, based on other reports, do try to get inside. But for, again, what reason? It remains a mystery. I am confident that many folks would say, oh, this is just cause harm, and that these creatures are just trying to get in there and have their way. But they're not devoid of being aggressive, of course, just as much as they're not devoid of being kind in some reports as well. But in closing, the evidence noted in the sounds and the broken limbs being at a noticeable height higher than an average person would reach does lean towards, and I try to be unbiased when I say this because I don't want to imply it because we just don't know, but Sasquatch. That is my own perspective after reading this and looking into this. We have to take into account, okay, now they admit they were having some whiskey, but this seems like it was hours later. They actually slept for a bit, so any effects would be gone by this time. They were cleaning fish. They had a heckin' good day catching fish. That would definitely attract something, bear or whatnot. Sasquatch like fish. So there's another case right there that you can throw into the stack of evidence. It's up to the listener, however, to form their own thought as to what these things could be. So you relate similarities. You notice things otherwise overlooked by others, even myself. I mean, I read these things over. I look at the things that are suspicious and relatable to other cases that we've talked about. But as long as we do have these reports coming in, then it helps to add another piece of the puzzle, regardless of how minor it may be. But with that, I'm going to close off this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. Thank you for tuning into it. And remember, check us out on our social media, our website, and our contact email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. Next week, though, it should be a good one. If scheduling aligns with Reuben, the topic at hand is excrement, fecal matter, simply known as poop. I think there is a lot of ground to cover when it comes to poop, literally. And cryptids, of course, they have to be subject to leaving waste behind. Like I said earlier, there is a rabbit hole based on how these things could just appear or disappear. But if you are in our, let's say, our dimension, stick with me for a minute. I think that there are dimensional rules that have to apply to you and you have to abide by, like leaving waste behind. And that, again, is the rabbit hole if the Sasquatch is able to access the quantum realm and go into different planes of existence. But of course, we just ultimately don't know at this point. But what we do know is things poop. And there have been some interesting findings with regards to Sasquatch poop in the past. So we're going to look into that and get into the whole nitty gritty of it. It should be hopefully not too much of a messy episode when it comes to next week, but I digress. And on that note, everyone take care and stay safe.